You go ahead and work on wrapping up what you're typing in there. If you want to keep typing in there, you certainly can. And this resource document will be there if people want to go back and check and see just the different ideas that people have. There's a lot of experts in this room. I, of course, do a lot of things with tech, but I know a lot of you are out there, in the field doing lots of different things with really good creative ideas. And so I wanted to have a place for people to sort of pull in that information, that expertise that you have. And so this will be there if people want to go back in and just check it for ideas, help you brainstorm, come up with different things that you're looking at, and also as a way to help each other out. So if you happen to know something that helps with someone's question or something that they're looking for, then you have the opportunity to kind of add in that resource for them. So thank you for taking a look at that document. All right, so today, what we're going to do, just kind of basic introduction, we're going to talk about what are HyperDocs. So that's kind of our main topic for today, because HyperDocs really are a really interactive type of assignment and way of structuring and doing lessons. I'm going to give you some examples, and I'll give you time to kind of explore and discuss ideas and share what you have, if you happen to have any that you're using. And we'll do kind of a discussion and Q&A at the end of it. And I'll have links for you in chat. I'll give you lots of I have a whole bunch of resources for you on this at the end. So if you want to continue to explore on your own, you're certainly welcome to do that. So, and for today, please feel free to jump in at any point if you have questions or comments, or if there's anything that you want to add, you're more than welcome to do that. I get bored talking to myself, so I'd love to talk to you too, or all of you as well. And if you happen to have any resources or links, you're more than welcome to add those into chat so that people can access those, and that would certainly be welcome by everyone, I think. So thank you for your participation. And as I said, I'm teaching high school right now, and it's interesting to do that when they're all like, I don't want to unmute, or I don't want to be on camera. So those are entertaining conversations. Okay, so HyperDocs, just out of curiosity, how many of you have heard of HyperDocs before or had a chance to use them? You can either just give me a quick thumbs up if you know how to do that in Zoom, or you can give me a visual on camera, or you can put in chat yes or no. And it's always interesting to switch back and forth between Zoom and Google Meet. So for those of you that have been doing that. All right. Okay, I see some of you have, some of you haven't. All right, so we got kind of a variety of skills, so that's good. Some a little bit, some a bunch, so all right, good. HyperDocs are really interesting. I think I came across them the first time a couple of years ago through some of the tech coaching work that I was doing. And there's actually a really good book called the HyperDoc Handbook. I'll have a link to that at the end of the slides if you'd like to take a look at that. But what HyperDocs did for me, that really helped me kind of rethink how I did my tech and really sort of transform the way in which I presented it to students and how I used it with students. And so that's one of the reasons why I like it, is because it gave me a whole lot of ideas I hadn't thought of before. And that's one of the reasons why I think it's valuable. And it works, of course, great with Google Classroom, because one of the primary ways people use HyperDocs is to do the Google Suite. So they use, Google Docs, slides, drawing, all that kind of stuff sort of tied in together. They're not the only types of tech that you can use with this, but they're probably the ones that are used most often. People certainly use like Microsoft tools. They'll do HyperDocs on websites. So if you don't have a certain set of tools, that's okay, because it's not tied to one set. It does happen to work really well, I think, with Google Classroom, because you do have that opportunity to put in basically your templates and have students all work together on something, or you can, of course, do it where you can make a copy and every student has their own. And there's some ways that can really kind of help shine with things with differentiation and that type of stuff. So I think HyperDocs are very versatile. You'll see all kinds of different versions of these. And it's also a good way if you're in CDL, some of us are pretty strapped for time depending on what's going on and the responsibilities we have. There's a lot of resources out there that you can pull and either use it as is or adjust it for what you need. So it's also another way to get a great deal of resources in your hands, which is kind of nice for everyone for teaching. And it's built to be online, which is also helpful. And along with that, has anybody had to teach, or anybody gotten to teach face-to-face yet, just out of curiosity? Is that happening for anyone yet? Okay. So I'm getting a lot of no's on that one. I know most of you probably haven't. So I've done a little bit of face-to-face teaching this summer with EOU before. kind of before we came back to regular school. And it was interesting because you can use HyperDocs in a way to keep students collaborating while still having to be physically distanced, because that's kind of a tricky thing to figure out, how do we keep our kids physically distanced, but how do we still let them collaborate? How do we still let them work on things together? And HyperDocs also facilitates that as well. So that's kind of a nice piece too. So just a quick reminder on these 4 C's. So these are important with technology, the idea of communication, collaboration, critical thinking, and creativity. And this ties in really nicely to HyperDocs and the way that they work. The one that I like to focus on more is the collaboration piece, especially with online learning, because there's a lot of like student-teacher connection, there's a lot of student content connection. And I think where online learning really shines is when we can get our students connected to each other. And that's another thing that HyperDocs helps us to do. So why HyperDocs? Here's some background, and then we'll go into what they actually look like and what they are. So it builds unit or lesson in advance, right, which a lot of us are doing anyway. So you've got everything there, you've got it set. It's easy to collaborate, of course, with things like Google Docs. You can parcel out pieces of it to your team or your PLC, or just people you're working with in other districts, so you have those options. Components of good lesson design are built into HyperDocs. And if you look here, they have some specifics that are on this. So they have the engage, explore, explain, apply, reflect, share, and extend. And there's actually HyperDoc templates that go through each of those steps. So if you want to create a HyperDoc, you don't have to do all of it from scratch. There's templates you can use, and it'll go through and walk you through those lessons. Independence. So we need a lot of that right now, right? With the things that are going on in CDL. Students need to be able to work a little bit more independently, and HyperDocs are set up to sort of facilitate that. So if you need students kind of to be a little bit more on your own as you go through and try to get to everyone and work with everyone, it'll help with that piece. And engaging packaging, you can go as overboard with that as you want or keep it minimal. Either way is fine. But there's some really interesting ones out there once you start looking. Flexible lesson design templates. So like I said, there are templates that you can use, and you of course can change those into whatever you want, or you can scrap them and just do your own thing. That's one of the things I like about them, is that they're very flexible, and it can be as structured as you want, or you can do kind of your own thing. So you have the choice and kind of everything in between on that. Teachers can be freed up to work in small groups. And this one always seems a little bit weird to people, but what I found is when I have my students in a class working on HyperDocs, they're all kind of working on their own thing. And then it's a lot easier for me to go around and give one-on-one help. And that's kind of nice, because it's sort of, the HyperDoc leads them through the lesson while I go around and assist students. And that way I'm actually able to get to more students than I would otherwise. And that's actually really handy. An integrated variety of digital materials, very multimedia, so you can link whatever you want, basically. And then students can work at their own pace, which is also helpful with distance learning. And then I really like this differentiation and student choice piece. In Google Classroom, just in case you're not aware, you're able to actually assign things to specific students. So maybe you have students who are modified or on an IP or 504, or maybe you have English language learners, or you just want to divide up what they're doing and maybe you're jigsawing something out, whatever it happens to be. But in Google Classroom, you can go in and click on when you assign it and click on the students and decide who can see the assignment and who can't. And with HyperDocs, that makes it a really easy way to quietly differentiate, if that makes sense. So you give it to students and that's all they see. They don't even necessarily have to know that there's another version of that assignment. So it's an easy thing for you to do in Classroom. And then flip your instruction. If you're familiar with that model, this is a good way to try to make it so that students are doing the easy things without you, so that they can do the harder things when you're there with them and can actually help them out. Like if you're doing any live sessions or those kind of things. And then what is it? A couple things on that. So it's transformative, interactive. So we talked about this idea of interactive, and I see a lot of that in the warm-up where people want to do interactive things. Personalized, as we mentioned before, kind of that differentiation piece, and engaging, and a tool to help facilitate creativity and collaboration. And as far as what a HyperDoc is not, there's a lot of confusion sometimes. So the substitution of just like, we'll do this instead. And if you're familiar with SAMR, it's not in that substitution zone. It's higher than that. It's not a digital version of a worksheet. And this is where I think a lot of people get confused. They're like, just take their worksheet, stick it in a Google Doc. Hey, I got a HyperDoc. And that's actually not a HyperDoc. That's a worksheet. So, and that's something I kind of feel like, hey, look at this example. I'm like, that's not a HyperDoc. But that's okay. It doesn't mean those don't have their place. We use those for certain things. But a HyperDoc is not a digital worksheet. It's a lot more interactive than that, leads people through different things, facilitates more collaboration, that kind of stuff. Standardized can be. Yeah, or sorry, it's not standardized because you can do that differentiation again, and it's not inflexible. You can do all kinds of stuff with HyperDocs, which is really one of the strengths of it. And then it's not just another way to disseminate information to be consumed. And one of the resources on HyperDocs, I'll give you a webinar you can go and watch later if you want, from the people who came up with this idea. But they basically say that teachers, I'm trying to remember how this quote goes, teachers are not assigners, they're designers. So they're not just assigning work, they're actually designing experiences for kids to go through and learn things and to do well with what they're learning. And then kind of this last part for me is the key question is, what can I do now that I couldn't do before? What am I using this technology for to enhance the lesson that would be harder to do otherwise? So again, it's just not that idea of an electronic worksheet. So I'm going to pause here for a second because that was me telling you a whole bunch of stuff. What questions or comments or things are on your mind or that you're thinking? I'll give you a moment to think about that, but if you want to add something in. Heather, are you raising your hand or stretching? I'm not sure. Okay, I'm just checking. All right. So what are some possible questions that you have right now? And yes, I am recording it. So as far as the recordings, I believe I did get a question on that, so I'm just going to let everyone know I am recording. And then the IMESD is going to post the video so that people can go back and see the sessions later if they need to. So, all right. We'll not do questions for them. Anything else? All right. So that's kind of the basic rundown. Here's a couple things that I personally really like about this and why it's helpful for me. More, like I said, more one-on-one time for students. That one's a really big one for me. So it really does. People say, how does giving all the students an assignment give you more one-on-one time? Well, like I said, it's a very step-by-step kind of lesson that leads them through lots of things. And then it allows you just to have more time to circulate around the room, or maybe online you can do certain breakout rooms and talk to groups of students, or small groups, or maybe one-on-one with kids, while they have something that is directed that they can go through and work on while you're making more of that individual contact. And then that easier to quietly differentiate so it's not as noticeable, especially with Google Classroom and pairing it with that. And then creativity, there's all kinds of different approaches for this that are pretty fun to look at, and we'll look at some examples in a little bit. And it's not just about the tech. So some people look at these and like, it all has to be tech. It actually doesn't have to have any tech except for maybe a Google Doc. If as long as you have that, that's fine. There's some of the really good HyperDocs I've seen and that I've seen people use take the idea of giving students direction. So if they're in a face-to-face class, it'll say, okay, now stop and turn and do this thing with your neighbor or your partner or whatever you're doing. So it's not just kids reading through and answering questions on a document. It's giving them directions on how to interact and collaborate and make sure that they are doing things with one another versus just reading and going through the sheet. So not just about the tech. It can be a lot of in-person stuff too. And then it's easy to embed other technology if you want it. So I've seen a lot of HyperDocs that have Flipgrids in them, or they'll go to Padlet, or they'll go to some other kind of technology that's there. And that way it's all kind of in this one place in the lesson instead of students having to go click in a bunch of different spots. So we want to minimize those clicks as best we can, and this is one way we can do that. And yeah, the only caution on this is make sure students know how to use your tech. I have seen some people try to integrate or use HyperDocs, and they make this really great HyperDoc. They bring it to their class, and maybe they, oh, by the way, they're awesome subplans. I did not put this in there, but HyperDocs make fantastic subplans because everything's laid out for your students, and they follow it, and the sub doesn't have to really do much. So that's kind of nice too. But I've seen teachers who go in and maybe have used the HyperDoc as a subplan with tech they didn't explain to their kids ahead of time, and that's tricky. So you got to be careful with that. Don't throw a bunch of new tech at them with these HyperDocs. Teach them how to use them just like you would anything else. And that's kind of a cautionary part, but that goes on with these problems to consider. So if you have a HyperDoc that's really complex, you're going to make sure that you train your students how to use it. because some of these do get really involved and really in-depth. There's really simple ones and there's really in-depth ones. And if you go on the more in-depth side, make sure your students know your expectations and know what it is you want them to do and how to use that tech. And the thing we're running into lately, so is this whole thing with CDL and technology. I'm not sure how much of you are experiencing this, but our students, especially those on school Chromebooks are not built to multitask. They're not good at doing maybe more than one, maybe two things at once if you're lucky. So if you have kids on a Chromebook in a Google Meet or on Zoom, and you send them into Google Drive, whatever tool that is to use it, it may bog down. So just be aware of that piece. One of the things my colleagues and I have started doing at the high school is kind of telling them, you know, here's your assignment. This is what you're going to go work on. If you're having the bandwidth or Chromebook issues, sign off while you work on it. And then here's the time you have to be back or how many minutes. And students have been pretty good about coming back. Once in a while, I have one that's kind of off somewhere. But usually they'll come back when they need to. And that's been working better, we're finding, because running a Google Meet at the same time that you're trying to have them do documents, especially a collaborative one with a lot of people on it, is really slowing down their machines and the bandwidth stuff. So just kind of be aware of that piece. That part is a bit of a detriment, but if we're aware of it, we can kind of plan around it and try to make it work. Is anybody else experiencing that, just out of curiosity? Okay, definitely Shelby, right? And you got the little kids, so that's trickier when that happens. At least my students are better at like problem solving all that. So I'm going to give you an example. I'll put this link in the chat. So let me grab that for you here. So this is an example using Google Maps. And I think Google Maps is a really interesting and kind of fun tool. And so I'll give this to you so you can look at it while we check it out here. But you can go ahead and click on that link in chat if you like. So this is, once it pops up here, so here's the HyperDoc. This is a simple one-page one, so it's not overly complicated. It's pretty basic, and in this case, it's just got a video. You can go and click on to see the video. Students watch that. They think about the story that goes with it. I'm not going to play the video for you, but you can certainly go back and look at it if you want. And then it goes down to your directions here. So they have a collaborative map, and if I go here and click on that, of course, this is a demo one, so it's not completely exact, but we'll zoom out on our Google map here, but you can see we have these pins in here, and each of these pins is related to that assignment. Students put those pins on. Some of them will have more detail than others. So this one is just sort of more of a community builder. So they talk about their happy place. In the actual one, it tells you, to go in, put a title for your place, type the story of your place. You'll notice in the example, there's not a lot of stories because this is just one that's kind of out there. And you can add images and video. And so it goes in to talk about, kind of this community builder using geography and doing some different things along those lines. And then you save it to the map, and then you can go and explore other people's places and use that as a teaching tool in your room. So that's a one-page one. It's pretty easy. And then they also embed video tutorials, which is nice. And I should probably make this bigger, I realized for you. Sorry. Blow it up a little bit here. But they have this video tutorial here, and there's a sample map, so that's the one that's in there, but that one doesn't have a whole lot on it, but you'll see as you do it with students, they'll of course have more stuff according to these directions. So that's one quick example with a one page, and it incorporates Google Maps and video. And it's also collaborative because you have students kind of looking at and seeing what each other's work and what's there. And so that's one possibility. I'm going to put in another example for you, and this one has to do with a global reading log. So this is a little more literacy based, and I'll put this in chat so you can see that. Yes, and so to answer that question, students do put their own pin on that map, but all the other students can see it because it's a collaborative map, so they can kind of see that and work together. And there's some really interesting, like social studies and ELA applications for that, which you can do a lot of fun stuff with Google Maps for sure. So this global reading log example is this one here. And if you look at this one, you have this part here that says why, learn, try, do, reflect. That's actually the lesson structure, which I think is interesting. So you can take this one and use it as a template if you want. You've got it set up so why, and then so why, so we have why it matters, and then they'll go into each of these different separate sections. And in this one, it uses ThingLink. So if you're familiar with ThingLink, ThingLink is a website where you can take images and embed information into them. This link isn't quite working quite right when you click on it because the image isn't showing up. But you have this basically an interactive image that kids can do different things with. And ThingLink's a pretty cool tool, and it does some neat stuff. And if you notice here, this is one of the things that I like. It says talk with a partner about the book you've read. So it's not just let's do things on technology. Of course, right now online we'll need to. But if they're in the physical room, they'll talk with that partner, have a conversation. It directs them to interact with each other. And then if they're online, you could of course put them in breakout rooms, or maybe they have a document or whatever it is for that discussion. And then there's some videos in here that are tied into that thing. And there's a sample map that you can take a look at. And so you can see the different examples that they have on here, and the books that kind of go with it, where these books occur according to where they are in the world with this lesson. And then there's a section where they try it together. And if you notice, this one says it's optional. So you can decide if you want that or not. You can leave it in, you can take it out, whatever works. And this is where they make a map as a class, which is kind of like that other one. They pull up the map, put on their stuff, drop in their pins, and they can all see each other's work. And then they're going to make their own. So it's basically that, you know, I do, we do, you do concept. So they do one together. Now they're going to do their own, and it walks them through those pieces. And then there's a reflection section that has a Padlet. And like I said, this is a sample, so there's not a whole lot on that Padlet, but there are some things. And then some extra stuff. So if they want to have an extension activity or whatever it is, this links into Wonderopolis for those of you who are familiar with that website. So this is kind of another example. When you go through and do kind of the exploration that we have with these, there are some that are highly in-depth. Like today I was actually looking at one on a lesson that I taught, you know, 2 weeks ago because I'm already done with it, but I saw this cool lesson. And it had to do with early humans, and it was really in-depth and really interesting. And it used the concept, I'm trying to remember exactly what the books where it's like tiger versus lion or whatever, if you've seen those and you have kids working with those, and it's based off that concept. And they have kids working through and creating something based on those kind of books. So on here, let's see. Those are our 2 quick examples we're going to look at. There's also templates, as I mentioned. And in this one here, you have, this one starts out a little bit differently than the one we just looked at. So this one has this why, learn, try, do, reflect. And then this is a little bit different template. So it does engage, explore, explain, apply, share, because they want to make sure that they're working together, and reflect. And so this is another template that you have access to. And I'll give you those template links so you have them. We're not going to play with them a bunch right now, but we'll come back to that in a little bit. A typical lesson with one template, it can last as long as you want. It could be 10 minutes or it could be a 2-week unit. So you can decide kind of where that is. And it's really flexible. So however you want it to work is how it will work. And that's one of the things that's nice about it. And I've seen some, like I said, I've seen some really in-depth, like entire units that are built off HyperDocs. And then there's some that take 10 minutes. So it can go either way on that spectrum. So we're going to explore some ideas for a little bit. So actually, before we do this, I am going to have you look at the templates for a moment quick, just to make sure you have an idea of how some of those work. There is a HyperDoc website where the people who kind of came up with that concept have a lot of different things. What I'm going to do is put a link in the chat to the template resources. And so I'm going to give you about 5 minutes just to explore those templates and see how they're set up. There are some that are very specific, and there are some that are general, like this one here on the screen. So I'll give you 5 minutes. I'll throw a timer on there, and I'll give you just a little bit to go in and kind of play around and look at what's on that site. If you want to look at other parts of the site, you can too. And we'll look at the examples here in a couple minutes. So, and then, of course, you can certainly ask questions as you're going through, and let me know as you're looking at those templates. We've got around 2 minutes left, and if you want to either unmute with questions or observations, you can, or if you want to put questions or observations in the chat, you're welcome to do that as well. Yeah, so when you do a HyperDoc, you would give it, so the question is, would you assign these in Google Classroom and each student would get their own copy? Yes, so that's what you'd want to do. In a lot of these templates, you just go to File, make a copy, and you can save it to your own drive. And then you can make any adjustments you want to do. You know, use those templates, set it up how you want, and then put it in Google Classroom and assign it to students as like that attached document where you can do, make each student a copy. And that's the easiest way to do it. If anybody wants to know how to force copy because you're not using Google Classroom, I can show you how to do that too, because that's an easy way to make it so that students are always messing up the make a copy thing. That way it makes them make a copy, which is handy. So that's an option too.
I've noticed when I put a Google form on there, it doesn't always have that option. Have you ever seen that? Like it will always has that option with Google Slides, but with Google Forms, it doesn't always have that that drop-down menu.
Yeah, and it generally won't with forms because forms work a little bit differently. What you can do is you can, well, there's two options. You can create the form outside of Google Classroom and then attach it. And if you do that, it won't give you that option. It'll just, you know, say
so it automatically is a separate copy for each of them.
Yep, already.
Okay.
And then the other thing you can do is create it within there. But either way, each student will already automatically get their copy with forms instead of.
Okay, that's why.
Well, that's a good question though. So thanks for asking that. Advantages to doc slides or forms. LeBlanc, do you mean just sort of like one over the other kind of a thing? Like is one better than the other, or just so I can clarify your question? Okay. And I would say it would depend on the purpose of your lesson. I actually see probably more HyperDocs that are created with slides than I do docs, but I tend to use docs because those work well for me and what I'm doing with my social studies content. That's my 5-minute timer. But there are, I'd say it really just depends on what your instructional purpose is, because with technology, we always want to go back to, you know, what's our purpose before our tech? And sometimes docs work better, sometimes slides. There's actually situations where Google Draw works really well, and I'll talk about that here in a second. And forms, I think maybe not so much for the HyperDoc part, unless you're embedding a form within a HyperDoc, if that makes sense. So it kind of just depends on your instructional purpose, if that helps at all. I know that makes it probably sound more vague, but yay. All right, so I'm going to go to another part here before we come back to our discussion. So I'm going to do this quick and give you some more examples. So I'm going to give you some non-HyperDoc examples. So they don't fit that exact criteria of HyperDocs, but I think they're really helpful in helping us brainstorm different ideas and ways to be interactive and to do these things. And one of them that I really like is using Google Draw for math. And so I'll go ahead and I'll put this link in there so that you can take a look at that. And move my windows around on my other screen here so I can get what I need. So Google Draw, I think, is a very overlooked tool in the Google suite. Google Draw does a whole bunch of really cool stuff. And so that's one that I think it's good for people to consider the options and the possibilities. And I'll have the slide link for you at the end, but there is this link down here on the bottom that gives you a HyperDoc that's built for teachers to help teachers learn how to use Google Draw so that they then can use it with their students. So I think that's kind of an interesting way to do it. So go ahead and click on that link. It's a blog post, and it goes through a whole bunch of different examples of things. So let me get to my right thing here. I'll do this quick so I can get rid of my window and get to the right spot. So this is the blog post, and it goes through and gives a whole bunch of examples. And you can actually get your own copy of each of these examples, which is nice. I'm actually scrolling down to one that I want to show you here for a minute. So here's some stuff on fractions. There's stuff on using shapes to draw. Here's counting a number of pets. So there's, you know, elementary all the way up through, like, they actually have AlgebLocks. For those of you who are familiar with AlgebLocks and how those work, they have a template for that. Like this one, these congruent shapes, you can actually, so if I click on the link, this is that force copy that I was talking about. So that when people click on the link, it makes them make a copy. So this congruent shapes one, you can actually go in and have draw, and it's basically a way to have manipulatives for your students, you know, whether they're in elementary or high school or whatever it is. But they then can use these shapes and they can, you know, flip them around, move them, see if they really are congruent, you know, move things around and check it out. Maybe I'm trying to see if these two are the same. I can actually go like this, put them together, see if they do. And they can play with things and move around. It's a way to do manipulatives. And a teacher that I was working with not long ago was doing some things with reading that I'll show you in a minute. And she said, you know, at first she was really preparing for this physically distanced teaching, right? Because that's what they were told to do. And trying to figure out how to do manipulatives with kids in a way that didn't have contamination, kept everything separate, every kid needed their own, all those kind of things. With this, you don't need to do that because they just have their drawing or doc or whatever it is, and then they can do their manipulatives, and then you don't have to worry about keeping them sanitized, which is actually a really handy thing right now. So there's lots of different things. If you are teaching maybe middle school or high school math, like here's one with angles. Sorry, I'm going through this part a little quick, but you can do shape sorts for those of you who are doing different things with categorization and shapes. And then counting, so you can have kind of the tokens and move the tokens around on your sheet. And I really like this one because I used to do math tutoring and use AlgebLocs in math tutoring. So here's AlgebLocs for those of you who are familiar with those. I'm excited about it. But you can go through and actually move those around in the Google Draw and use it to help kids learn how to solve algebraic equations and things. So that's pretty fun. Yep, so students use Google Drawings to make their own Maslow pyramids. That's a good one. So that was a good suggestion from Scott in the chat. Double checking here to see, yeah, and back to LeBlanc's question, slides, docs, forms, they're all really integrated. As far as explaining them to students, I'd say the easiest is probably just docs because it's like a word processing thing. But you know, I've seen them used in lots of different ways with lots of different grade levels. So we're all going to have to take some time probably to explain some of the tech, but docs might be easiest. But I think maybe in sometimes for elementary, sometimes slides is easier. And I'll give you an example of some slides here in a second. So another example is this one that's not a HyperDoc technically. And this was shared with permission from Holly Wagner, for those of you who know her, the grade teacher at Island City. And so this is her word work that she's doing with students on a weekly basis in elementary. And one of the things that I like to point out about slides is that, you know, back to that idea, Google Draw can be interactive. You can move things around, but you can do the same thing with slides. So she has this word bank down here, and then kids just go through and drag and drop into the slide, wherever it is that that's supposed to go. I'm not actually looking where they go. I'm just dragging them in. Oh, that one got a little bigger. So things like that can happen. But you can actually make manipulatives within slides as well. And kids can move those around and do their word work that way. And then you kind of have these sanitized versions that you can do. On this one, I'm going to go and zoom out a little bit tinier. So you can see that you have the word bank over here, and students have that word bank for reference, and they can go in and use that. Again, this is another one where you can drag stuff. But you can make Google Slides in ways that allow students to do more manipulatives, which is nice. And it's not a HyperDoc technically, but it is a way to make things more interactive with students, which is nice. And then one other one, this is from our Spanish teacher here at the high school. He actually made an app using Google Slides and had his students put it on their phones, which was kind of interesting. And he's got directions for how to do that. But I'll give you the link to this one, or actually to both of those, so that you can take a look at them and play around with them if you want. And they both gave me permission to share, so that's lovely of them to have done that. So I'll grab these for you. So this link is the slides with the word work, so that you can take a look at that one. And then the second one is the slides app. I'll give you that. And of course, this isn't really an app. It really is just a Google slideshow. So when I hit present, it'll pop up and you can see the enter now, and it takes you in and gives you the menu. And you can see, you know, here's the calendar. If we need to go into the calendar and see what's going on in these 3 classes, we can do that. We can click on them. It'll give them access. It's all right there. Click back on home. You know, if we want to know what's going on this week, we can do that. Click on each of the classes. It'll bring us in and show us, you know, what the work is for that week, so students have access to it. We click into these, it takes you to a Google Doc that explains it all. And he does a bunch with Bitmojis, so you can kind of see that in there. So it's just one way to sort of keep everything for your students in one place and have it there. And then just make it a little bit more interactive for kids to find what they need to do in distance learning. And it's working out fairly well for him. So that's an option that you have. And we'll go back to home. He's also got, you know, books in Spanish, so ways that his students can access multiple ways of doing books at home, because we know that's the concern for kids, right, to having enough access to books in their homes. And so this is a way to do it electronically and just different things like that. So you can play around with that if you like. And that's another way that we can use things to be a little bit more interactive. And I think he used a template to create this one, but he's pretty creative and came up with a bunch of stuff for that. So. All right, so we're going to back up to our discussion here. So we're going to do some exploration. So I'm going to give you a link, another link in the chat. Sorry, I'm giving you a whole bunch of links. This one goes to that official HyperDoc site and goes into the example section. So you can look at different possibilities. I know there's a lot of people here who are teaching different grade levels, different subjects. And so this gives you an opportunity to look at something that might be a little more detailed for you and what you're doing. So I'm going to give people a couple of minutes to just kind of scroll through, pick a section. So you're going to pick something that you want to look at, and then just be prepared to discuss what you find. So I'll put this in there, and I'll give you probably, we'll do 4 minutes to explore that one and just kind of play around with it for a couple of minutes. So that last link there, so HyperDoc examples, and it will bring you to that page with those examples. And so you can see it gives you lots of different options. So math, science, of course, lots of topic or content stuff. And then there's, you know, specific, so elementary or secondary. There's a lot of interesting novel studies that are done with HyperDocs. And this one down here, this one with Nadie Gilkison, is a whole bunch of templates if you want to look at her templates and other things. So you've got some different options. So I'll give you about 5 minutes to go through and kind of play around with that one and look at options. And then we'll do a little bit of discussion on that. So about 2:18. And of course, keep asking questions as you have them. And any of these you can make copies for yourself. Just go to File and Copy, and anything that you're looking at, you should be able to save one for yourself. Okay, got a little less than 2 minutes to finish exploring. As far as how it coordinates with Google Classroom and grading, it works pretty well. So it's just like any other assignment you would put in there. It's just more of a different approach as to how you create the document you're giving students, whatever that happens to be. And it works pretty well, I think. You just kind of go through and grade it like you normally would. You attach it like you normally would. If you're using the Google Suite, you can add in comments just like you normally would to give students feedback. And so it integrates pretty well with the classroom and grading features. The only time that it would be a little bit tricky, I think, is if you're doing something like embedding other tech inside of it. So if you embed like a Flipgrid video, students would submit their document and Google Classroom wouldn't necessarily know if they did the video. So you would have to manually check anything like that you add in that's extra, if that makes sense. Work on wrapping up what you're looking at. If there's one you find particularly interesting, hold on to that one. And we'll give you a chance to have some discussion here in a minute. All right, so what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna put you in breakout rooms really quickly and just give you about 5 minutes to have a conversation with one another and talk about the things that you saw, things that you think would work well. If you have things that you think are problematic, certainly discuss that as well. So think about what you explored. If you want to keep looking at ideas together, you're certainly welcome to do that and kind of let people know what it is you're finding. And think about what do you do or what can you do with HyperDocs in your classroom. So I'll go ahead and put you in breakout rooms to be in with about 3 or 4 different people, and I'll give you 5 minutes. So give me a quick thumbs up if you're there and if you're good with what we're doing. Okay, thank you. I'll see you soon. And then just checking in with people who are still in the main room. If you have any questions on things, please let me know. Happy to answer those. And I'll probably jump into some of the breakout rooms. I think we've got most people back pretty soon. 7 seconds, then we'll have everyone back. All right, welcome back from there. In the conversations that you had, is there anything that really stuck out to you, or that you had as either like, hey, this would work well, or maybe this is problematic, or maybe I have a question here? So what are some of the things that stuck out to you in your conversations? And my goal is to have you not be your students and actually talk today.
We kind of ended up on it. This looks like it's a great tool for secondary kids, but would be super hard to implement for students that are not yet independent learners.
Possibly, and I've actually seen some kindergarten teachers do this in some really cool ways. So the tricky thing, of course, with primary is they can't always read the directions, right? So that's not as easy. But what I've seen some kindergarten teachers do is they'll make a HyperDoc, and what they do is they put a video of themselves explaining the directions. So as long as the kid can click on the video, they can do everything else that needs to be done, because the teacher then is able to explain it through the video. So I thought that was actually really creative, and I've seen some good things with that. So, and generally, yes, you would think that was the case, but people find ways, and that's why I like teachers. So
I'm glad you pushed back on me about that. That's great.
you're good. That's my job. It's what I do.
We actually talked about using the slides a lot, especially with like Bitmoji right now is super popular. But we talked about that, and then this just makes logical sense to move all of your lesson in one HyperDoc. Way easier. It makes sense. It's way easier for the sub. It's way easier for your kids to locate everything in one spot. So that was really cool.
What we want to try to do with online learning is minimize clicks to get where they need to go. And so if we have everything in one place, that's way easier, and we can have one assignment in Google Classroom instead of like 3 or 4. And so it's all right there, and that helps with that online learning. So you need to minimize clicks. And there is a comment in the chat that was right before we went to breakout rooms, but it looks like we can be as modular as we like, and that's true. So you can have Kahoot, you can have videos, you can have students do multiple layers, and it can be simple too. Yeah, depending on how it's set up, it can be harder to grade, but in some ways, depending on what the project is, it might be easier, because you might have all the pieces of that project in one spot. So it just depends on what you're doing. What are some other takeaways that you have from your conversations or exploring? Or questions?
We just, with my little group, we talked about too that we have to be careful with the hyperlinks, because the one that I was clicking on, it was like, this link no longer works. So if we were to use this year after year, we got to check that stuff out.
Yep. So you got to double check your links, make sure those are working. And that's one of those things with online teaching. And I've been teaching online classes. This is probably my 10th year where I've had online classes at least a little bit every year. You got to go back and check your links. It's just one of those parts of doing that and reusing your stuff for sure. But that's a good point to bring up. I'll jump in here before we go so I can get you out on time. I'll put the slideshow link in, but you can see I've got a bunch more resources for you. If you want to explore this further, you certainly can. Let me grab that here, and I'll put my email link in there also in case you have questions. But there's a whole bunch of links in the presentation itself, and they're all hyperlinked so you can go through them. This page has a whole bunch of different things. I added this one in today because I've talked about this a couple different times with people, but this one is about specifically building HyperDocs for remote learning. And I thought that was a useful resource to put in for people. The other one is this HyperDoc handbook, which is the book I mentioned at the beginning. And I looked on Amazon today, and the Kindle version is $9.99. I like the Kindle version because it has all the stuff hyperlinked in it. So it's easy to get to places and see the things that they're talking about. And if you want to use a lot with Google, that Google Teacher podcast on the bottom underneath my bar there is really helpful too. And then I really recommend this webinar. It's put on by the people who wrote that book. And they walk you through and give you the slides and walk through what they're doing while you're looking at the slides, which is pretty handy. And then Jennifer Gonzalez, I know that she's been mentioned a couple times in different sessions for things. She's got a really good article and podcast on HyperDocs and resources on how to build them and what to do with them. And if you have questions, you're always welcome to contact me. You have my email address, and I really appreciate the conversation and people coming in and being willing to talk about this today. So if you need anything or have questions, I'm more than happy to have those questions. Go have a great day, and hopefully your weekend is good too. You're all doing awesome, by the way. I love all the work that I see people doing. It's very creative and good. So thank you.
Thank you.